One step ahead. Presence. Easy learning for kids. The 4 stages of cognitive development. Background and key concepts of Piaget's theory. Cognition refers to thinking and memory processes, and cognitive development refers to long-term changes in these processes. One of the major theories of cognitive development is of Piaget. Piaget, who was working primarily at Geneva University in Switzerland, began his investigations into the workings of the child's mind because of an interest in epistemology. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy, is the study of knowing. Cognitive development theory. Jean Piaget. Jean Piaget, a Swiss psychologist, was particularly concerned with the way thinking develops in children from birth till they become young adults. To understand the nature of this development, Piaget carefully observed the behavior of his own 3 kids. He used to present problems to them, observe responses slightly after the situations and again observe their responses. Piaget called this method of exploring development clinical interview. Piaget believed that humans also adapt to their physical and social environments in which they live. The process of adaptation begins since birth. Piaget saw this adaptation in terms of 2 basic processes: assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation. It refers to the process by which new objects and events are grasped or incorporated within the scope of existing schemes or structures. Assimilation occurs when we modify or change new information to fit into our schemas, what we already know. It keeps the new information or experience and adds to what already exists in our minds. Assimilation takes place when we use our existing schemes to make sense of events in our world. Assimilation involves trying to understand something new by fitting it into what we already know. At times, we may have to distort the new information to make it fit. For example, the first time many children see a raccoon, they call it a kitty. They try to match the new experience with an existing scheme for identifying animals. Accommodation. It is the process through which the existing schemes or structure is modified to meet the resistance to straightforward grasping or assimilation of a new object or event. According to Piaget, there are 4 basic elements in development. 1. Maturation. 2. Experience. 3. Social transmission, learning through language, schooling or teaching by parents. 4. Equilibrium. Equilibration. Piaget believed that all children try to strike a balance between assimilation and accommodation, which is achieved through a mechanism Piaget called equilibration. As children progress through the stages of cognitive development, it is important to maintain a balance between applying previous knowledge, assimilation, and changing behavior to account for new knowledge, accommodation. The important concept of Piaget's theory of cognitive development is the fixed progression from one stage to another. Piaget viewed cognitive growth as a progressive change. Growth varies from person to person. Piaget assumed that it follows a fixed sequence. Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development suggests that children move through 4 different stages of mental development. His theory focuses not only on understanding how children acquire knowledge, but also on understanding the nature of intelligence. Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development suggests that intelligence changes as children grow. A child's cognitive development is not just about acquiring knowledge, the child has to develop or construct a mental model of the world. Cognitive development occurs through the interaction of innate capacities and environmental events, and children pass through a series of stages. Piaget's stages are: sensory-motor stage, birth to 2 years; pre-operational stage, from age 2 to 7; concrete operational stage from age 7 to 11; formal operational stage, age 12 and up. Piaget believed that children take an active role in the learning process, acting much like little scientists as they perform experiments, make observations, and learn about the world. As kids interact with the world around them, they continually add new knowledge, build upon existing knowledge, and adapt previously held ideas to accommodate new information. Piaget's stage theory describes the cognitive development of children. Cognitive development involves changes in cognitive process and abilities. In Piaget's view, early cognitive development involves processes based upon actions and later progresses to changes in mental operations. Piaget introduced the concept of schemas as the basic units of knowledge, the building blocks of intellectual development. Schemas are the mental images or generalizations that form as people experience the world. Schemas, in other words, organize past experiences and provide a framework for understanding future experiences. At first, infants form simple schemas. Later, children form more complex schemas. In Piaget's view, a schema includes both the category of knowledge and the process of obtaining that knowledge. As experiences happen, this new information is used to modify, add to, or change previously existing schemas. After observing children closely, Piaget proposed that cognition developed through distinct stages from birth through the end of adolescence. By stages he meant a sequence of thinking patterns with 4 key features. They always happen in the same order. No stage is ever skipped. Each stage is a significant transformation of the stage before it. Each later stage incorporated the earlier stages into itself. Piaget's theory suggests that children progress through a series of 4 different stages of cognitive development. These stages encompass numerous aspects of mental development including that of reasoning, language, morals, and memory. Piaget believed that kids take an active role in this cognitive development, building knowledge as they interact with the world. Piaget proposed 4 major stages of cognitive development, and called them: 1. Sensory-motor intelligence. 2. Pre-operational thinking. 3. Concrete operational thinking, and 4. Formal operational thinking. Each stage is correlated with an age period of childhood, but only approximately. The infant knows the world through their movements and sensations. Children learn about the world through basic actions such as sucking, grasping, looking, and listening. Infants learn that things continue to exist even though they cannot be seen. They are separate beings from the people and objects around them. They realize that their actions can cause things to happen in the world around them. The sensory-motor stage is the earliest in Piaget's theory of cognitive development. He described this period as a time of tremendous growth and change. In other words, they experience the world and gain knowledge through their senses and motor movements. Through trial and error, children discover more about the world around them. Piaget chose to call this stage the sensory-motor stage because it is through the senses and motor abilities that infants gain a basic understanding of the world around them. The abilities that an infant is born with, sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, combined with physical capabilities that continue to develop, including touching, grasping, and tasting, allow infants to interact and build awareness of themselves and what is around them. Piaget believed that developing object permanence or object constancy, the understanding that objects continue to exist even when they cannot be seen, was an important element at this point of development. Major characteristics and developmental changes at the pre-operational stage age, 2 to 7 years. Children begin to think symbolically and learn to use words and pictures to represent objects. Children at this stage tend to be egocentric and struggle to see things from the perspective of others. At this stage, kids learn through pretend play but still struggle with logic and taking the point of view of other people. They also often struggle with understanding the idea of constancy. For example, a researcher might take a lump of clay, divide it into 2 equal pieces, and then give a child the choice between 2 pieces of clay to play with. One piece of clay is rolled into a compact ball while the other is smashed into a flat pancake shape. Since the flat shape looks larger, the pre-operational child will likely choose that piece even though the 2 pieces are exactly the same size. Piaget noted that children in this stage do not yet understand concrete logic, cannot mentally manipulate information, and are unable to take the point of view of other people, which he termed egocentrism. During the pre-operational stage, children also become increasingly adept at using symbols, as evidenced by the increase in playing and pretending. For example, a child is able to use an object to represent something else, such as pretending a broom is a horse. Role-playing also becomes important. Children often play the roles of mommy, daddy, doctor, and many other characters. Understanding egocentrism. Piaget used a number of creative and clever techniques to study the mental abilities of children. One of the famous techniques to demonstrate egocentrism involved using a 3-dimensional display of a mountain scene. Often referred to as the 3-mountain task, children are asked to choose a picture that showed the scene they had observed. Most children are able to do this with little difficulty. Next, children are asked to select a picture showing what someone else would have observed when looking at the mountain from a different viewpoint. Invariably, children almost always choose the scene showing their own view of the mountain scene. According to Piaget, children experience this difficulty because they are unable to take on another person's perspective. The concrete operational stage is characterized by the development of logical thought. Thinking still tends to be very concrete, but children become much more logical and sophisticated in their thinking during this stage of development. In this stage, they think abstractly and hypothetically. Understanding logic. Piaget determined that children in the concrete operational stage were fairly good at the use of inductive logic, inductive reasoning. Inductive logic involves going from a specific experience to a general principle. An example of inductive logic would be noticing that every time you are around a cat, you have itchy eyes, a runny nose, and a swollen throat. You might then reason from that experience that you are allergic to cats. Kids become less egocentric. The concrete operational stage is also marked by decreases in egocentrism. While children in the preceding stage of development, the pre-operational stage, struggle to take the perspective of others, kids in the concrete stage are able to think about things the way that others see them. In Piaget's three-mountain task, for example, children in the concrete operational stage can describe how a mountain scene would look to an observer seated opposite them. In other words, kids are not only able to start thinking about how other people view and experience the world, they even start to use this type of information when making decisions or solving problems. The concrete operation stage is associated with middle childhood, 7 to 12 years old. Children can count, measure, add, and subtract. They can use simple logic and perform simple mental manipulations and mental operations on things. Piaget called this period the concrete operational stage because children mentally operate on concrete objects and events. During this stage, children are usually interested in how clocks work, how measurements are made, and why this causes that to happen. They often like to assemble things. Children at this stage understand the logic of reversibility, that if you just poured the water from one container to another, you can pour it back, and it will be the same amount. One more example of reversibility is that a child might be able to recognize that his or her dog is a Labrador, that a Labrador is a dog, and that a dog is an animal. Another key development at this stage is the understanding that when something changes in shape or appearance it is still the same, a concept known as conservation. They begin to understand the concept of conservation, for example that the amount of liquid in a short, wide cup is equal to that in a tall, skinny glass. Major characteristics and developmental changes. At this stage, the adolescent or young adult begins to think abstractly and reason about hypothetical problems. Abstract thought emerges. Teens begin to think more about moral, philosophical, ethical, social, and political issues that require theoretical and abstract reasoning. Begin to use deductive logic, or reasoning from a general principle to specific information. Neat task involved having children of different ages balance a scale by hooking weights on each end. To balance the scale, the children needed to understand that both the heaviness of the weights and distance from the center played a role. Younger children around the ages of 3 and 5 were unable to complete the task because they did not understand the concept of balance. 7-year-olds knew that they could adjust the scale by placing weights on each end, but failed to understand that where they put the weights was also important. By age 10, the kids considered location as well as weight but had to arrive at the correct answer using trial and error. It wasn't until around age 13 that children could use logic to form a hypothesis about where to place the weights to balance the scale and then complete the task. Abstraction of ideas. In another experiment on formal operational thought, Piaget asked children to imagine where they would want to place a third eye if they had one. Younger children said that they would put the imagined third eye in the middle of their forehead. Older children, however, were able to come up with a variety of creative ideas about where to place this hypothetical eye and various ways the eye could be used. For example, an eye in the middle of one's hand would be useful for looking around corners. An eye at the back of one's head could be helpful for seeing what is happening in the background. Deductive logic. Piaget believed that deductive reasoning becomes necessary during the formal operational stage. Deductive logic requires the ability to use a general principle to determine a particular outcome. Science and mathematics often require this type of thinking about hypothetical situations and concepts. Abstract thought. While children tend to think very concretely and specifically in earlier stages, the ability to think about abstract concepts emerges during the formal operational stage. Instead of relying solely on previous experiences, children begin to consider possible outcomes and consequences of actions. This type of thinking is important in long-term planning. Problem solving. In earlier stages, children used trial and error to solve problems. During the formal operational stage, the ability to systematically solve a problem in a logical and methodical way emerges. Children at the formal operational stage of cognitive development are often able to plan quickly an organized approach to solving a problem. Hypothetical deductive reasoning. Piaget believed that what he referred to as hypothetical deductive reasoning was essential at this stage of intellectual development. At this point, teens become capable of thinking about abstract and hypothetical ideas. They often ponder what-if type situations and questions and can think about multiple solutions or possible outcomes.